He noticed her before she noticed him, standing at the far corner of the small neighborhood restaurant, gripping her purse as if it were the only thing keeping her grounded. Her eyes darted around anxiously, and though she tried to steady her breathing, her trembling hands gave her away. To anyone else, she might have seemed like just another nervous woman on a blind date, but to Daniel, something felt different. Something deeper, something heavier. And when he noticed the little girl holding her mother's hand, wide-eyed, quiet, clutching an old stuffed rabbit, it became clear this was no ordinary evening. He had almost cancelled the date an hour earlier. After months of pushing himself back into the dating world, forcing himself to move on from the quiet ruins of failed relationships and the loneliness he carried like a shadow, he'd felt tired. Tired of trying, tired of hoping. But something in his gut told him to go. Something whispered that maybe this time would be different. Still, he had no idea just how different. When she finally looked up and saw him, relief washed across her face, relief so strong it moved him before they even exchanged a word. She tried to smile, to appear composed, but her voice wavered as she greeted him, and the little girl hid behind her leg as if afraid of taking up too much space. They sat in a booth near the window, the evening sun dipping low outside, painting soft streaks of gold across the room. As they settled in, he noticed how carefully she placed the child beside her, how she kept smoothing the girl's hair, how she whispered reassurances that seemed practiced, worn from repetition. And then he saw it. The little girl's plate, empty. Not, hasn't arrived yet, empty. Not, still choosing what to order, empty. Just empty, as if it wasn't meant to be filled. The menu was in front of her, but the child didn't reach for it. She just lowered her eyes to the table, small fingers tracing the cracked laminate surface, pretending not to notice the plates of food being served around them. He felt his heart tighten. Her mother wasn't eating either. She kept urging him to order whatever he liked, insisting she wasn't hungry, insisting she'd eaten earlier. But he'd heard that line before, in another life, when he had volunteered at shelters, when mothers skipped meals so their kids could eat. When people pretended hunger didn't hurt if they ignored it hard enough. He could tell, she was lying, and she looked exhausted from it. She talked about her job, 3 part-time shifts stitched together like an old quilt just to barely make ends meet. She talked about how she didn't normally bring her daughter on dates but hadn't been able to find a sitter. She apologized again and again, tripping over her words, trying to keep the evening from feeling like a burden. But it wasn't her words that pierced him. It was the way she kept glancing at her daughter's empty plate. The way guilt flickered in her eyes every time the child looked away. The way she pressed her lips together to keep them from trembling. He'd been in this restaurant many times. He knew the prices weren't outrageous, but they still weren't small. And judging from the wear on the woman's purse, the frayed strap of the little girl's dress, the cautious way she asked about the cheapest drink on the menu, every detail told a story she hadn't dared to speak. He didn't want to embarrass her. He didn't want to make her feel exposed. So he did what kindness does best, he disguised it as something natural. He ordered several dishes, calling them sample plates. He wanted everyone to try. He joked that he hated eating alone and needed help finishing. He asked the little girl what her favorite food was and added it to the order before she could protest. When the plates arrived, he pretended to be full after just a few bites, urging the child to taste everything. And slowly, carefully, the girl began eating. At first cautious, glancing at her mother for permission. Then hungry. Then desperately hungry. Her small fork moved faster, her eyes watering as if her body wasn't used to the relief of being fed without tension, without worry. Her mother kept whispering for her to slow down, but even her voice cracked as she watched. And when the woman finally allowed herself a bite, tears slipped down her face before she could hide them. Daniel felt something shift inside him. It wasn't pity, it was recognition. Life had been unkind to her, but she wasn't asking for saving. She was trying, fighting, every day, carrying burdens that would break most people, shielding her daughter with everything she had, even when everything was barely enough. Strength wasn't always loud, sometimes it was quiet, trembling, sitting in a booth pretending not to be hungry. As they ate, bit by bit, the heaviness around her began to lift. She laughed once, soft, unsure, as if it had been years since her laughter felt allowed. Her daughter, now full and smiling shyly, played with her stuffed rabbit and looked at Daniel as though he were some gentle, unexpected miracle. When the meal ended, the woman reached for her purse, panic washing over her face. She flipped through the worn wallet, searching for bills that weren't there. He knew she wanted to pay at least something so she wouldn't feel indebted. He gently touched her hand, told her it was his treat, but she refused at first, tears burning in her eyes. She whispered that she didn't want him to think she had come for a free meal. She said pride was all she had left. Daniel looked at her and felt his chest tighten again, not from sadness, but admiration. Pride wasn't her last possession. Strength was. Dignity was. Courage was. And he saw all of it in that moment. He reassured her that he didn't think any less of her. That a date was never about money. That kindness wasn't a transaction. Slowly, trembling, she allowed him to pay. When they stepped outside, the evening air felt cool and gentle. The little girl held Daniel's hand as they walked to the parking lot, trusting him as if she'd known him forever. Her mother struggled to keep her composure, brushing away tears when she thought neither of them could see. Before they parted, the woman tried to explain her situation. She spoke about her ex, who had walked away when responsibilities became too heavy. She spoke about losing her home, moving into a tiny one-room apartment, working every shift she could find. She spoke about promising herself she would stand strong for her daughter, even when her strength felt scraped down to the bone. And she said she hadn't wanted to come tonight, because she was ashamed of struggling, ashamed of being seen, ashamed that she could afford only 2 meals a day, and usually gave one to her child. Daniel listened, truly listened, not with judgment, but with a heart that had been lonely long enough to recognize the pain of someone trying to survive without losing their humanity. When she finished speaking, she apologized again. And he did something simple yet deeply powerful. He told her she didn't need to apologize for being human. That night, when he finally drove home, her story clung to him like an echo he couldn't shake. He lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, thinking of the little girl's empty plate, the mother's trembling hands, the quiet dignity of someone doing the best she could with what life had left her. And something awakened in him, a purpose he hadn't expected. Over the next few weeks, he didn't just date her. He showed up. He helped her look for better work and found a job listing he knew she'd be perfect for, one with a steady salary, health benefits, and flexible hours. He coached her through the interview, encouraged her when she felt unworthy, reminded her of her talent, her resilience, her brilliance. And she got the job. The day she received the offer letter, she cried so hard she couldn't breathe. Not because someone had saved her, but because someone finally believed she was worth saving herself. Daniel also helped the little girl without making her feel helped. He brought books, toys, healthy snacks, disguised as gifts or fun surprises, never charity. He drove them to parks on weekends, let the girl feed ducks, taught her how to ride a bike. Slowly, the child's cautious eyes softened into trust. And the woman, she bloomed. The stress in her shoulders loosened. Her laughter grew freer. She started dressing not in desperation but in confidence. She began to believe, truly believe, that a better life was possible. But transformation never arrives without challenge. One evening, months later, her ex returned without warning. He demanded to take the child. Not out of love, but because he'd heard she now had a better income and wanted access to whatever benefits he could extract. Old fears resurfaced, trembling through her like the shaking of a fragile bridge. She felt herself falling apart. She felt life slipping away again. But Daniel stood by her, steady as a pillar. He helped her find a lawyer, guided her through the paperwork, encouraged her to fight for the custody she rightfully deserved. And she won, not because of Daniel's help alone, but because of her unbreakable strength, the strength she had rediscovered through love, support, and finally believing in her own worth. The day the custody decision was finalized, her daughter ran into her arms, sobbing with relief. And the woman looked at Daniel with a gratitude so profound it brought both of them to tears. Months passed, seasons changed, and so did their lives. What began as a blind date slowly became a family. Their wedding was simple, held in a small garden filled with fairy lights and roses. The little girl walked down the aisle holding a bouquet she'd picked herself. And when Daniel saw her, he felt the depth of a moment he'd never thought he'd experience, the quiet miracle of choosing love, and being chosen back. But the most beautiful part was not the wedding. It was the life after. A life where meals were shared without fear. Where laughter filled rooms once heavy with silence. Where the little girl grew up knowing that kindness could change the shape of a future. Where a mother who once felt broken now walked with the confidence of someone who had risen from the ashes and rebuilt everything she'd lost. And on their daughter's 8th birthday, as she blew out her candles, Daniel watched them both with awe swelling in his chest. It struck him again, the memory of the first night he saw them. The empty plate, the trembling hands, the quiet pain, and he realized that life sometimes leads us to the exact moment we're meant to change, if only we're willing to look deeper, listen closer, and act with compassion. His blind date hadn't needed rescuing. She'd needed someone to remind her that she wasn't alone. And through helping her, he discovered that he'd been lonely too, hungry for a connection deeper than he'd ever known. In giving her hope, he found his own. In comforting her daughter, he healed the child inside himself that had once felt abandoned. What he gained was not just love. It was purpose, family, belonging. And years later, when people asked how they met, he would smile and tell them. It started with an empty plate, but it became the story that filled my life. Because sometimes the smallest moments, the ones others overlook, carry the power to change everything. This is a reminder to everyone listening. Kindness is not weakness. Compassion is not a burden. And sometimes the person sitting across from you, nervous, tired, pretending to be fine, is fighting a battle you know nothing about. If you can be the reason their life turns around, even a little, even for one night, you've already changed the world. So always choose kindness, always choose understanding, and always choose to be the reason someone believes in good again. If this story touched your heart, make sure to like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories. Your support helps us continue spreading love, hope, and motivation to people all around the world.